Okay, we're live. This is the new Atlas. I'm Brian Berletic. Joining me, as always, is Angelo Giuliano. We're live. We are going to try to do this once a week. We got a couple of topics. We want to talk about, of course, the situation in Ukraine, China. There were some incidences in China we want to talk about, and also Iran and a couple of other things. Hello, Angelo. How are you? What's on your mind this week?
Great, Brian. I think we should touch also Myanmar. We
Yeah.
can see many similarities between all those topics. It's always about interference, regime change, how actually they claim that they want to export democracy and they don't respect democracy. By definition, we always repeat that, but democracy is a process of self-determination. So
Yeah.
do we get the people to decide for their own destiny or not? If we don't, well, that's pure hypocrisy. It's exporting a system of control that ultimately is going to be the decisions are going to be made in Washington or Brussels.
Absolutely. So you mentioned Myanmar. I have a contact in Myanmar that sends me information, photos, videos of things happening on the ground. This wave of terrorism that we're told are freedom fighters rising up against the government. And of course, as I pointed out many times before, and I have a video coming out this coming week all about this. They're funded by the U.S. They're backed by the U.S. Aung San Suu Kyi, the ousted leader, she is a creation of U.S. Geopolitical interest. They built her up over decades through the media, through pumping millions of dollars into Myanmar, and they got her into power. But we hear she was the democratically elected leader. But as you said, Angelo, if it's not the people in Myanmar actually behind her, if it's the U.S., if things about her policy are determined in Washington rather than across Myanmar by the people, then it's not democracy. Democracy is the smokescreen. This regime change and this modern day imperialism is taking place behind. What about Ukraine? How closely are you following that, Angelo? Are you following that pretty closely, or
Pretty
just
close.
the major
Pretty
headlines?
close. Major headlines. I mean, just we waiting for this supposedly attack on Kherson, but it seems like not much is happening. I think there's some progress on the Russian side towards Bakhmut, but not. You probably have more content, more to say when it comes to this. Otherwise, well, we have some news related to a possible false flag operation. I think we had these discussions, you and I, these days, was that there's probably a window of opportunity which is 2 months. The optics are showing that actually that Ukraine has taken some ground, but this is just optics. It's what we call a Pyrrhic victory. Pyrrhic victory means they have lost so much to achieve very, very little. In reality, they're losing badly, but the optics is showing that they gain ground. But we are talking about open steps. They take these open steps, it means they are going to be sitting ducks, easy to be targeted by Russian forces. So they have a window of opportunity of, I would say, 2 months before you have the 300,000 Russian troops that actually are going to complete the Russian forces along the line, Donbass and all the way down to Kherson, and they need to do a false flag operation within those 2 months, because false flag operation would work only if they can say, well, Russia was desperate, they see they were losing, and they planted a bomb, a dirty bomb. And I think this is very dangerous time. We have 2 months. After that, I think there's a high probability that Ukrainian forces are going to collapse completely, because they've thrown everything they had. They have no equipment. They have the best forces die. They were suppressed. I mean, keep in mind that Mariupol, the attack on Mariupol was a 1-to-1. In 1 month, they wiped out the best Ukrainian forces, the Azov battalion, in 1 month. And we are talking about, usually the attack is 3-to-1, right? Here, Mariupol was 1-to-1. It was a huge humiliation, a huge win. It's unique. It's quite unique, like having this ratio of 1-to-1. for a city as big as Mariupol, I think that was a defining moment back then, and that was a win. It's not about taking open steps that they did. What they did in Kherson was open steps where actually they didn't even fight Russian army because no one was there. And so we need to really put the facts together. And I think, really, war could be over in 2-3 months. And it's going to be a tipping point where you have a complete collapse of Ukrainian forces, complete, because they have nothing left.
I agree with a lot of the points you're saying. I won't even dare predict when it might be over, but you're absolutely right. It looks like Ukraine is making huge gains. We saw them move through Kharkov. We saw them get a little bit of territory in Kherson, but then stop. And just as you say, they're throwing everything that they have at Russian defenses. They're being wiped out. Even the Western media is admitting this. This is the most interesting thing about this conflict, is that I explain this to people, and people say, Brian, you're a Putin propagandist. Of course you would say that. But actually, I'm citing the Washington Post. I'm citing the New York Times, where they talk about the massive, unsustainable losses that Ukraine is suffering around Kherson. And a similar situation happened during the Kharkov offensive. That was rushing across open territory, and the Russians had very few forces around Kharkov, and they were just bombarding these Ukrainian forces out in the open. So this is what I like to say, is that this is not a turning point for Ukraine. This is the end point. They've gotten this far. They're throwing everything they've got. You can see the West emptying their inventories for Ukraine. I just saw there's another assistance package. I didn't look into it, but that the headline said that they're not even sending more weapons, just more ammunition, because they're out of everything. And their military industrial capacity does not have the ability to produce arms and ammunition on this scale, because they were fighting these small wars against developing nations around the world for decades, and they were ill prepared for a large conflict of this nature. And it will take years. People don't realize. You can't say, well, let's expand our industrial capacity, and by next week we should be up and running. No, it could take a year. It could take 2 years. They're talking about 1 to 2 years for different processes that will just make enough to then, at that point, begin replacing Ukraine's losses. And all the while, Russia is expanding their industrial capacity for this conflict. So everyone needs to keep that in mind. The dirty bomb, you mentioned the dirty bomb. Yeah, this is something. I mean, this is one of those things that we're not going to know until. We may never know the truth behind this, but if you were following the conflict in Syria, you'll remember Russia trying to get ahead of these false flag chemical attacks in Syria. And they would do the exact same thing. They would, through their media, they would go to the UN and they would say, there's going to be a chemical weapon attack. It's staged. It's by these militants backed by the West. So be on the lookout. And hopefully, by getting ahead of it like that, they can discourage it, or they could blunt the impact of it when it finally happens. Think about the regime in Kiev from 2014 onward. They do everything the West tells them, but they also think, because they do serve Western interests, that they're special and that they can get away with anything. And I think maybe the West isn't even behind this. Maybe they were doing this on their own. And this is a hypothesis that Alexander Mikuras presented, that the Ukrainians were doing this on their own. Russia told the world about it, talked to the leadership across the West about it. The West is, of course, publicly going to deny that it ever happened, but privately they will tell Ukraine, no, please don't do that. You're just going to make it worse for yourself. Because I don't think how could it unfold in a way that would be beneficial for Ukraine at this point? As you said, Angelo, they're losing. I don't know if it's going to be a couple of months or another year until this is over, but they're clearly they have nothing to replace their losses, and Russia is coming in with 300,000 extra troops. So it looks bad, and I don't think a dirty bomb is going to turn things around for them. Angelo?
I want to add, I think it's a very good point. I think NATO doesn't want to get involved. Keep in mind that the purpose of NATO is to use Ukrainian lives, Ukrainian soldiers. Why would they want to be involved? And I think if there is a false flag operation, it's going to be on the Ukrainian side, because they get frustrated and they know they are going to be dropped. They're going to be used up to the point where just there's no more use, and probably I think people like Zelensky, they have a backup plan. He's got a house. He's got a few houses in Miami, in Italy. He's multimillionaire. Keep in mind, there's one thing really important. In 2019, they exposed Zelensky in the Pandora paper, and they exposed also his backer, Kolomoisky. Kolomoisky, keep in mind that he was the State Department was looking for him because he stole $5 billion from a bank, private bank. It's massive. When you think about $5 billion for Ukraine, we are talking about 7% of Ukrainian GDP. So it's massive. He left, and he's got several citizenships. One is from Cyprus, and I'm not sure if he's got one from Switzerland. So you see those people, they exposed them in 2019. So they have something on them. It means if they don't follow the Western agenda, well, they can always catch them, and they're going to end up, in prison. So they have something on them, and you need to question the timing. Why 2019? They are your partners. You issue those Pandora paper, and those guys are trapped. They have no way out. So every time you need to question really how they become U.S. agents. And you have several times, many times you have those agents that actually you realize, what do they have on Tsai Ing-wen? Tsai Ing-wen, very simple, we know that since 2005, she was having secret meetings with AIT, she was working as an agent. She has actually lied about her PhD. She claims she has 1.5 PhDs. She doesn't have proofs, actually. You need to have a thesis. You publish your thesis, nothing. She came out only, 15 years later with something which was co-written by, so lots of holes there. So you see, so we need to really look at how do they get those agents, and what's the process, corrupting and so on. And I think you mentioned just before Aung San Suu Kyi. I think this is an amazing case study, how they corrupted Aung San Suu Kyi. So you select her, then you prop her up, you groom her, then you put her on Times Magazine, and up to the point where those people, they don't work for their own country, they are going to work for you, and they are enslaved. You enter into this process, you cannot get out. It's really impossible. Or in the worst case, what would happen for Zelensky if he was to do that? He get killed. He get killed either by the Azov Battalion or by the CIA. And guess who they would blame? They would blame Russia.
Yes. So isn't that interesting? That in reality, when you really look at it, someone like Zelensky or Tsai Ing-wen, they're the biggest threat they face is their own side, the people handling them. If they're not performing or they're not obedient, how quickly the West will turn on them. And we've seen this all throughout history. I saw an interesting comment, this one right here. Mm-hmm. Russia loses more land every day. That's true. Russia does lose territory. Recently, they've been losing territory because of these Ukrainian offenses. But you know what they haven't been losing? Huge numbers of men and huge numbers of equipment. They were withdrawing from this territory. They're preserving the lives of these men. They're preserving their heavy equipment. And all the while, Ukraine is gaining territory they are trading their entire army for, to the point where even the Western media has to say, yes, Ukraine is losing brigades worth of men and equipment around Kherson alone, brigades. Even Kiev itself, before the offensive started, we're talking about losing 200 300 dead a day. A day. It's probably three times that now because of the offensive. So people that are looking at this conflict, people who are following the Western headlines and not even thinking about what's going on, look past the superficial metrics you're using to determine who is winning and who is losing. By the time we're through the winter or in the middle of the winter, whose military is going to be in better shape, Russia's or Ukraine's? And be honest, where's Ukraine getting more tanks from? Share that information with me. I would like to hear it, because I haven't even heard the slipperiest propagandists come up with an explanation as to where Ukraine is going to get more tanks from. You think they're going to continue fighting this war and win without tanks? No, not a chance.
Can I add one more thing? It's true. Russia has lost land, but actually I made a mistake. I said Kherson before. It was actually Kharkov. They lost a lot of land in Kharkov. But keep in mind, those lands were partially populated. You know, I think it's much more important to, I mean, if you lose a big city, that is really important. That is a big loss. I mean, if they were to lose Kherson, I think would be a huge loss. That would be pretty bad. But other than that, just look at the statistics. They've taken very large cities, Mariupol, Kherson. What did they lose? Like what was Lyman? Can you give me a few cities? I mean, actually, there were towns, small towns, and of course, they were not too happy about this. But they didn't have enough soldiers because the line, we are talking about thousands of kilometers. It's impossible. It's impossible to control with the forces they had. It was impossible. Now, with depleted forces from Ukraine, you know, they lost so many, a lot of heavy equipment. Now you have 300,000 new forces coming in. They have preserved their forces all along. You know, keep in mind it was they have advantage in artillery. I don't know what's the ratio. It's 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. It's huge.
Yeah, it's huge. Yeah.
And they have long range, meaning, you see, when you have long range, you hit them and you're not hit back. And it's unlimited. Unlike what the Western media, they were saying, you know, after, you know, already 3-4 months ago, they were saying, well, you know, Russia doesn't have enough missiles. Well, they've never thrown so much missiles as now, especially the tactical, you know, the one that are the hypersonic missiles. So, you know, it's Russia has been ready for a long time, and you see, it's a long-term plan. It's not about optics. It's about really the long-term plan. It's going according to its own plan, and I think it's really important especially for the pro-Russian side. They're getting hysterical. Because they're thinking the same as the pro-Ukrainian side. It's not about one day to another. It's about the long-term plan. Well, look at now the trend in 8 months, where Russia has 20% of Ukraine. This is fact. This is a fact. And look at how in a bad shape is Ukraine right now. How many soldiers have they lost? What is the estimate? What is your estimate figure, just in terms of soldier lost lives, and also the one that are injured?
Yeah, like injured and never fighting again. So if you add all of it up together, it's over 100,000. The Russian Ministry of Defense gave a number. There was another number floating around. It was, you know, open source intelligence, which I really don't, unless you can show me some evidence that this number is based on. There was a much higher number, but I think the Ministry of Defense gave a pretty accurate number. And that's if you just take Kiev's own word, 200 to 300 a day before the offensive started, the obvious uptick in losses once the offensive started. You add all of this up, plus you take into consideration throughout a week, Russia will carry out, you know, a handful or more strikes across the country, in addition to the fighting already taking place. And that was before these drones and these missile strikes began. That would add to the number. And if you work with that and you add it all up, it is about the same as the Ministry of Defense's number. I don't know if Ukraine. I don't think Ukraine is even giving a number, because if they did, I think everyone would realize, yeah, that's obviously not true. And they don't want to give a real number because it will be really high, and people will realize, well, then they're losing the conflict. That guy who I quoted, the guy talking about Russia losing all this territory, he claimed that he's in Ukraine fighting. Well, no wonder they're doing so poorly. You're on YouTube in the comment section. Get back into the trenches. This is the information war. This guy is fighting the information war. We've seen that. That reminds me. So we're talking about Ukraine. We're talking about information war. Elon Musk, I think, has now officially acquired Twitter. Have you read anything about that? I think that just happened before we went live.
It seems he started to fire people, especially the people that were actually banning. There's one person that actually banned Trump. So I think now he said many things before. Now it's about action. We are going to watch closely if he's going to follow with action. So I think the first thing to do is to reinstate Trump's Twitter. Would be just a symbolic gesture. And there's lots of. Yeah, and you too, actually. Yeah, this is my third account actually I have on Twitter, because they disabled already 2 accounts. I mean, so much for freedom of speech, really. But I think I want to be positive about what he will do. I doubt again. It's about real politics. He cannot go all the way, but I think if he can be some kind of counterpower, would be a good thing. I mean, just for the sake of democracy. But I don't know. This is a big question mark. I would not speculate too much. I have my hopes, but I mean, I think it's not a bad thing just to have Trump to be reinstated, just for the sake of plurality. I mean, some kind of plurality. I mean, but ultimately, you and I, we know that Trump. It's the same, it's not. It gives the illusion that there's an opposition, but it's not. I mean, but I would call it a minor evil. It's a minor evil.
You don't have to agree with somebody to recognize that they should be allowed to say. You don't have to follow them. You don't have to follow them on Twitter. That's the thing with these social media platforms. You follow who you want to follow, and who you don't want to follow, just ignore them. Why do you have to ban them or block them? On Telegram, you have both sides, especially with this Russian-Ukraine situation. You have both sides, and there are some really toxic people on Telegram. But you know what? You just ignore them. Just don't follow them. Follow the people you want to follow. It's so simple, and you can say and you can post whatever you want to within reason on Telegram, and it seems to work pretty well, and people can get the information that they want. I mean, I remember before I got kicked off of Twitter, I got kicked off of Twitter simply for showing a Getty image with a Nazi black sun symbol on the Ukrainian soldier's uniform, and I just pointed it out, and then my account was suspended permanently.
Yeah, I mean, I just want to add one thing. I mean, I like to keep on repeating that what we want is just two-facts to be out, and we want the truth. When it comes to opinions, actually, I mean, personally, I'm very flexible, Brian. But where I don't respect much is that people don't do their homework, and they falsify the truth. I just want the truth to be out there. You know what? If you are left, right, conservative, progressive, whatever, I don't care. But what I want personally is to have the truth. Just facts. Show me the fact, and that's the work we're doing, really.
Yes.
And very very often we are actually using Western media, and we expose their contradictions, because they're full of contradiction all the time. But the problem is that people in the West have a small attention span. They are fed so much, and I think we live in an era where people actually are slave labor. They work 24/7. They have 3 jobs. They are in a survival mode, and they need quick answers. And those quick answers, it's is it white or is it black? That's what they want to do. And people they start using their reptilian mind. Really, Putin. They hear Putin, oh bad. They hear China, oh bad. While there are nuances. You know,
Yes, obviously, especially like China is such a huge country in terms of size and population, and then just to write off 1.4, 1.5 billion people as bad, that is crazy. That's you're not thinking logically. You're not talking logically. There's two examples of what you're talking about, Angelo. You read the Western media, you read the headline, and then you read the whole article because you have to do a video or an article about it, right? So you have to read the whole thing, and you realize as you're reading through it, buried deep in the article, they completely contradict the headline. They don't even come close. So most people read the headline, drew their conclusions, and moved on. Maybe they read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs, which also reflect the headline. The video I'm doing on Myanmar is about Myanmar's military carrying out an airstrike on a concert. You'll see the headline and you'll think that is terrible. Myanmar's military bombed a concert, and your mind is imagining, normal concerts that you're used to at a public stadium, and someone just dropping air ordnance on the stadium. But that is not the case. If you read into the body of the article, you will realize Myanmar's military bombed an army base. Even the musicians were militants who just so happened to also play musical instruments, and all of the militants and their leadership gathered for a concert on an army base, and Myanmar's military took advantage of that and bombed it. Now, do you see how different that is between just bombing a concert with civilians and bombing a bunch of militants on an army base that just so happened to be having a concert at the time? The whole social credit story about China. I have an article coming, a video coming out next week on this as well, and I only use Business Insider. Business Insider, their article at the top, it's like this: the evil CCP is using the social credit system to cancel you if you're untrustworthy. But when you go through their own article, all you see is examples like people stealing train seats, people not paying their debts, people who have dogs that bite other people. I mean, these are all things you get in trouble for anywhere. There was not a single example where someone got in trouble for political reasons, not even one example. And yet that was the thesis presented or implied in the headline. So we see this every single day. Angela, do you have any examples that you've seen recently? Or
it's just we have exactly the same in the West. We just don't call it credit system. I mean, if you have debt and you don't pay your debt, then you are actually blacklisted. They share this information through banks, and it's going to be difficult for you to get a loan. There are a few cases. There's a good example of a person that was bankrupt, and actually probably hid money somewhere, but they wanted to make sure that you are not going to take a plane, because if you take a plane, it means you are able to repay the people you stole them, yes, you took the money from. That's just an example. The problem is that people, they'll stop at he cannot take a plane. And then if you realize the whole procedure makes sense, why this guy would be able to afford a plane if he owes money to people. As simple as that. But those are very isolated cases. The credit system in itself, it doesn't really exist. If it exists in China, well, it means it exists also in the West. It's not much.
But actually, the article even admitted, they say social credit system, but then in the article they admit there's not a single unified system, at least not yet. And they're actually talking about all different systems, including ones run by human resource departments in private companies, which you probably have a version of that in large companies anywhere on Earth. So it's just, when you see a new topic that you're not familiar with, start from zero and work your way up. Build up your actual fact-based knowledge about it. Don't let these articles shape your views, especially if you're just going to read a headline in the first 2 or 3 paragraphs. That's very bad. That's a very bad process to use. Since we're talking about China, former President Hu Jintao was let out of the Congress at one point. And I did a video on this, and I never imagined that I would have to explain this, because I thought people would understand what I was talking about. I said he's extremely old. He is very unwell. He has been out of politics for years and years. He's not in charge of anything. He's not involved in anything really. He's a retired politician. They had him there because he used to be the president of China. It was about respect and including him. He is unwell. And if you look at footage throughout the entire Congress, you will see there are young men with him, leading him in and out all the time. They're constantly with him because he is unwell. Now, Angelo, do you need to have someone walk with you everywhere you go? No, because you're healthy. He is unhealthy. He has groups of people who make sure he's okay to and from wherever he's going. Now, when he was having whatever problem he was having, they made him get up and they brought him out. Have you ever dealt with an old person who is unwell, who may not even realize what's going on, or who are just being stubborn because they don't want to go, even though they need to for their own sake, and you have to basically force them to go? And yet people in the comment section were saying, oh, Brian, he was definitely forced to leave. Yes, he was forced to leave because he's old. He didn't seem to know where he was at certain times, and he was unwell, and they brought him out. Now, Angela, maybe you can answer this question. Maybe I'm missing something. What kind of coup ousts a former president who hasn't been in office for like a decade and is in charge of nothing, and then you do it because it's a power move and you're proving to the world what's going on, but then you never explain what it was, and you have everyone's confused. Was he old and just let out, or is this some big power move? Like, why would China do that, make it so ambiguous, and why would they be removing some guy that's been out of politics for 10 years? Like, what kind of coup does that, Angelo?
Well, it was there present as it was just symbolic. It's a mark of respect for a next president. Hu Jintao doesn't have any power. People need to remember that actually Hu Jintao is an ally of Xi Jinping. He was the one that actually pushed for Xi Jinping to be elected. That's how it works. You know, when you leave office, usually you have a protege, and he was groomed and he was kind of selected. And I think Hu Jintao was one of the person that actually pushed for Xi Jinping to be in power. So I think it's just all fake. Again, you know, just if you have to do a coup, I mean, you know, it's very interesting because when it's in the West, they call it reshuffle of government. If it was to be in China, they would call it a purge or coup, you know. But in China, you know, if they had to do something like this, why would you do it at the Congress? You know, there are things happening behind doors, but you see, of course, there are different, you know, factions within the Chinese Communist Party of China. There are different factions. Well, because it's a democracy. You need to look at, you see, people, they say it's a one-party system. No, it's in reality, within the party, you have many different factions with many different opinions, and they come to a compromise. That's the difference between the West and China. The West is a system that divide people. It's extremely, there's a cleavage, and it's all or nothing. It's actually, there's a mob rule. You know, if you think about the West, it's 51% that actually can bully the 49%. And very often it's like this. It's really about destroying the opposition. Like when you see the Democrats in the US, they're actually bullying the Republicans, and actually they're using the FBI. There's abuse of power. In China, it's very different. It's about concession. It's about how we can reach compromises. And when they come up with all together, almost like 100%, well, it's because they reached a compromise. Everybody's pretty much happy with that. But it's how you can keep unity and harmony. But again, problem is that you need to be able to look with Chinese eyes, because in this system, we are talking about 2,000 years of history. They have an experience of meritocracy. When you had the Mandarins, you know, the Mandarin were the one that were passing the exams, extremely difficult exams. And here you have a system of selection and election, and where the best actually get to have the power. But keeping in mind, it's a system that unifies people. Why it unifies people? Because that's the only way you can rule China. China is a continent. Just to give you a scale, it's 3 times the size of Europe in population. It's 50 nationalities. It's thousands of different languages. And they found a system that works for them. And they're happy with that system, because it has been delivering. And most important, I think the benchmark we're using in the West and in China is very different. In China is about how happy are the people with that system. And the figure from Harvard University is 95%. Again, it shouldn't please me as a Westerner. Chinese should be happy with their system. Americans should be happy with their system. Europeans the same. But look at figures now, especially now, and when you look at UK these days is a banana republic. Rishi Sunak, he was not voted by the people, and he was the only candidate.
Yeah.
I think if we have Kim Jong-un from North Korea watching that, he would be laughing. And he would be envious because you see, they keep on calling this a democracy. Then I'm fine with that. As that's British people having their own system. And I think if we want to be consistent in our approach, if you are anti-imperialists, well, you should be, you should say, well, British people have to solve their own problem, and it's the same with China. Who am I?
Yes.
Who am I to judge China? And it's too complex. When you go to China, it's intimidating. You know why? Because there's so much which is so different from what we have. You come with your Western eyes, you arrive in China, you realize, oh my God, where am I? Where am I? Because it's that history is heavy. And when I come with my luggage, because we have a luggage, 50 years of experience, Western eyes, I go there, but you know what? You don't know anything. Just wipe out everything, all your preconceptions you have from the West, and try to be humble and try to talk to Chinese, but not a critical mind. Why should you have a critical mind? Especially your eyes are shaped by all your experiences and what you've learned. So you arrive in a different continent, different culture, different history. I think we should be just humble. The same as you go to Afghanistan. Do I like Taliban? If Afghani people like it, well, it's fine with me. Who are we? Especially with our history. Yeah, who are we to teach? In the U.S. in the 60s, you had the discrimination, black,
Segregate. They actually had segregation. Yeah.
Yeah, not so long ago, the West has put was the only the U.S. has put 2 nuclear bombs to Japan. Who are we to teach? The biggest crimes in human history was done by the U.S. Was a testing ground. Japan was a testing ground. Or let's put 2 bombs. We don't need, but let's put 2 bombs. And you know what? Hollywood would take care of that. We'll make some movies and we'll make the soldiers, American soldier, look good.
Yeah.
So that's a long one. So
no, but that's really, that's really good advice. You go to another country, be humble and try to learn. Don't just constantly compare it to what you know or what you think you know in an attempt to impose your way of doing things on other people. If you really do believe in freedom and self-determination, allow other people in other countries to have their own system. They don't need to have the same system as you. And if you honestly assess Western systems, you will realize they are far from perfect. And who in their right mind would look at the United States right now or the UK and say, wow, those are great systems. Let's copy that here in this country. Maybe a couple of decades ago, you could convince someone to do that. But even now, I don't know who is still falling for it. I just want to let people know we're going to take questions and answers. So the last live that we did, I was trying to present something which wasn't a good idea. So we didn't have time for questions. So if you have a question, please ask. I think here's a question. Why do they still have a gulag system? Who are we talking about? The United States, the largest incarcerated population on earth? Not just percentage of the population. Their prison population is literally bigger than, say, China's prison population, despite China having 4 or 5 times more people. So I really don't know. You have to be a little more specific. And also in the U.S. penal system, they do make people work. There is labor involved. So that's one question. So we're talking about Hu Jintao. He's very old. He was just led out because he's old and he's unwell. There was not any sort of coup. And remember, the same people trying to tell us that somehow was some kind of coup, Hu Jintao's been out of politics for years. They're the same ones who told us there was a coup against Xi Jinping a week or so before the Congress. Angelo, do you remember that? I had so many people asking me, Brian, what happened? What's going on in China? Nothing's going on in China. They're making it up. There was no coup against Xi Jinping. The army didn't move on him and place him under house arrest. As we can see, these are all things just made up to smear China. I don't know if you remember back in high school days when one kid is jealous of the other kid, he or she would just make up stories about that person to make them look bad in front of all the other students because they're jealous. They can't, play sports as well. They don't get as good grades. This is the U.S. with China. The U.S. can't compete. And so they're making stuff up about China and Russia and Iran and any other nation. Just name a nation. They're making stuff up. I mean, to simplify it, that is what's going on.
Yeah, I want to add one thing. People don't know why Xi Jinping is so popular in China. There's an era, especially under Jiang Zemin, was extremely corrupt. The whole family, the whole clan of Jiang Zemin, they're extremely rich, and people were really, really tired. Xi Jinping, he brought a new standards when it comes to corruption. So there was a we could call it a purge, of corrupt officials, and it was at all levels. And I remember corruption at very low level in China. I mean, from personal experience, because I've been doing business in China. 20 years ago, you could bribe, pretty much any official. It was so easy. You just, and it was a process, we call it the home bar. It's the red envelope. Just the envelope, you put it on the table, you get things done. It was how you dealt with the red tape in China. Now,
and you still do
no
that?
way. No way. Especially at the lowest level. Lowest level, no. There's still corruption. They still have their problems, like any other places in the world. But there's one big difference that people really do need to understand. When it comes to political power in China, capitalists, the entrepreneur, people with money have no place in politics. Actually, that's the last place that they want to be in, is into politics. Because once you have that, what will happen is the same as actually Putin did in Russia. Putin in Russia at some point, he took all the oligarchs one by one and he said, you know what? You stole that money, and you actually, it was because of Yeltsin era. And he was like, you stole all that money. We are not going to go back to that. That is past. You get that money, you keep it, but I don't want to see you in politics. Well, you know what? That's the same in China. If you look at the background, there was these days the CPC Congress. Look at the background of people. It's extremely representative of the Chinese society. We are talking about average Joe people that were working in their communities, village leaders. Really, blue, white collars, background. There's a lot of people that are, come from STEM fields, a lot of engineers. There's a huge difference. When you look at the US, look at who's in power in the Congress. Multimillionaire. Nancy Pelosi, she's worth $200 million. Joe Biden, $70 million. You have Obama, $70 million. Mitt Romney, $200 million.
And it's important to point out that they're not like really good business people. They're just corrupt. That's where all this money is coming from.
That's the revolving door. They're going back and forth, or they have their children that actually take care of the business. Nancy Pelosi, she went to Taiwan with her son, and her husband is actually taking insider tips to invest. The guy. You have Rishi Sunak. He's married to the daughter of one of the richest men in the UK. Who's worth $4 billion. Himself is worth $700 million. So you see, and they claim this is the government of the people, by the people, for the people. What are you saying? Do you think like a guy like Rishi Sunak, he cares about the people? And you see, they have the background of the globalists. I mean, they are globalists. You know why? Because they don't care about the country. Once you have a lot of money, you can leave right away. You have backup plan. It's not, those people are not attached to countries. So this is why they don't care. You really need to look at, people, do they care about their country or not? But when you are multimillionaire, you don't work for your country. You work for the globalist, the big corporation. That's what you do.
Although I would say in Russia or in China, you can see how businessmen or businesswomen who have really big and important companies, how they are put to task by the government rather than the other way around. I've kind of noticed that a little. And I think that is a very distinct difference between the West and, say, China. The people in high positions in China, they do have a background. They have experience working on the ground. This is not something you could say about most people in Washington who are career politicians. They've spent their whole life as politicians, their professional life as politicians. And we have a couple of questions here. So let's just put them up on the screen. Any idea of which eavesdropping avenue Russia discovered the dirty nuke? Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I think that we could only speculate. But you have to remember that Ukraine had been part of Russia historically, and then more recently as part of the Soviet Union. The nuclear power plants were all built by the Soviet Union. Ukraine didn't build these themselves. And so they probably have been keeping track of this, knowing how dangerous this could be. They could be using it to make a real nuclear weapon, or they could be using spent radioactive material to build, say, a dirty bomb. I think that is something.
Can I add one thing related to actually nuclear industry in Ukraine? Actually,
Sure.
The fuel was supplied by Rosatom. All the nuclear power plants, actually, they were supplied by Rosatom. There's one thing that happened in 2019. Actually, it was not covered much by Western media. Is that Zelensky signed a deal with the Westinghouse, for 6 nuclear power plants worth $30 billion. Well, now you see, remember the talk that Zelensky had at the Munich conference. He was actually threatening to acquire, nuclear bomb. He said at some point, I think it was the Budapest or the Bucharest, I think it was Budapest agreement, that in exchange of making sure that the Russia would respect Ukraine's sovereignty, Ukraine would give up the nuclear bomb. But keep in mind that nuclear bomb was always controlled by Russia. But there was,
Yes.
And he was actually challenging that. And I think this is part of the reason that actually Putin he decided to invade Ukraine, because he was crossing the line. I mean, there's a huge red line when you have a country like this, like Ukraine, that you have Azov, neo-Nazi, running Ukraine, and it's a de facto part of NATO, and what they want is to annihilate Russian people and Russian culture. If they acquire nuclear bomb, what would you do? It's just
Yeah.
So I think with this agreement with Westinghouse, actually Ukraine was going to really acquire the capability of having nuclear bomb, and was the next step.
I think it was definitely a contributing factor. I mean, one of many reasons that really left Russia with no choice but to do what they did. Here's another one about Iranian drones. Now, these Goran 2 drones look very similar to a Iranian suicide drone. I think it would be hard to deny that at least the design, the technology, the design was transferred to Russia. I believe that Russia is most likely making them themselves. So when they say all of these weapons that they're using in Ukraine are Russian technology, I think that's what they mean by it. It's not that complicated, especially if you have an industrial base like Russia does. They can take any idea that they see Iran came up with, that they're willing to share. They could take that and they can run with it. Russia has very large military industrial capacity. They do. I think
Yeah, Brian, I think it's interesting the hypocrisy of the West. They are actually accusing Iran of providing drones. I mean, I have that's a question mark. Maybe it's just the technology and so on. But I mean, do they even think about what the West, collective West, is doing with Ukraine? It's funding, it's training, it's giving weapons, it's even sending soldiers there.
Yes.
I mean, Iran is nowhere near to what the collective West is doing with Ukraine. I mean, it's just a pure hypocrisy. So exposing Iran at the UN for this, I think it's just so much hypocrisy.
Yes, here's a good question. This is about China. Could you explain what you know about Xinjiang? Sure, you know what the UK and US say about forcing 1 million into camps, and not that I believe the MSM on the subject. Well, I have covered this for years, as a matter of fact. Before I started doing videos, I was writing articles, and I've been talking about Xinjiang before anyone started talking about it, even before the US started accusing China of genocide. I was pointing out how the US was sponsoring terrorism in Xinjiang. There was very real terrorism in Xinjiang. The BBC at the time used to write entire articles with paragraphs after paragraph about the violence that these terrorists were carrying out, not just in Xinjiang, but across China. And then it started to spread out across Asia. And then they were admitting that thousands of extremists from Xinjiang were going to Turkey to cross into Syria and fight alongside Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So to say that Xinjiang had an extremist problem is an understatement. It was out of control. And then China started to uproot this problem. It was a counterterrorism program, very different than America's. America's counterterrorism program includes lying about countries so that you can invade them and then kill 1 million people. So think about this just at face value. The U.S. is accusing China of locking up 1 million Uyghurs. The U.S. killed 1 million Iraqis out in front of the entire world. It's not even disputed. They did that. And so even if what the U.S. is saying about China is true, it still pales in comparison to the types of real crimes against humanity the U.S. has committed. Now, China was putting people into, I wouldn't call them camps. They're training facilities, giving them job skills, but also deprogramming them. If you've ever met an extremist, the type of person that would join Al-Qaeda, they are out of their mind. Do some research into it, research into what their family members say about them, how, after they became extremists, we couldn't even talk to them. We haven't talked to them in years because every conversation is about killing the infidels, et cetera, et cetera. So it was a real problem. China had to solve it. And instead of killing everybody and using force, they gave these people a second chance. They deprogrammed them. They gave them a skill they could use to contribute to society and get jobs. They also invested in infrastructure all across Xinjiang to brighten everybody's prospects collectively. And it worked. They solved it. And it didn't take them 20 years and 7 destroyed countries later. They actually left Xinjiang better than when this all started. Angela, do you have anything to add to? One more thing. I have gone through the reports claiming that China is doing this. Reports by people like Adrian Zenz, funded by the US government. Reports put out by these fake NGOs based in Washington, funded by Washington. And I've gone through the reports in videos and also in articles, almost line by line, and showed people that even their report is not presenting any evidence of genocide, and they even admit it in their report.
Yeah, you just mentioned before Adrian Zenz. Actually, I mean, it's very, very easy. All this claim of 1 million Uyghurs to be put in concentration camps. I mean, what they call concentration camps, which is in reality is, like you said, those are educational centers, vocational centers. You actually teach them how to get a job. They learn, like mechanics or so on. But then this claim comes from one person, Adrian Zenz. He's a scholar, extremely anti-communist, anti-Chinese, and he did an extrapolate. He did actually an interview of 8 people from Xinjiang, and out of these interview, he did an extrapolation of 1 million. So you just cook the numbers. It's very easy to cook the numbers. But then look at the funding. Adrian Zenz was financed by the Memorial of the Victims of Communists, which was funded by Taiwan Foundation for Democracy. At some point, they paid $1 million. What is Taiwan Foundation for Democracy? It's a sister entity to the National Endowment for Democracy, which is the CIA. Which is the CIA.
One thing I just want to add in, that foundation that Adrian Zenz works for is based in Washington and was created and funded by the U.S. government. The Taiwan Foundation for Democracy was also funding it because they're all part of the same circle. So I just, it's important for people to realize, you're asking, why, and I understand people don't have time to look through it. Actually, real quick, I just want to show people how to do this, just in case. You never know. Go to my channel, and you're on the video tab, right? And they have this search glass, and you just type in like Xinjiang, and you will see all of the videos that I've done about this topic, and I document everything, absolutely everything. There's one video I did. There were so many references. There was no space in the YouTube video description, so I had to put it on a separate web. I had to put it on its own web page. That's how many references I used, and everything is there, including they had this tribunal, the Uyghur Genocide Tribunal, and I showed people how they had these witnesses, and they were just the heads of these NGOs based in Washington, and they're talking about, well, we're from a human rights organization, but you can see the East Turkestan separatist flag in the background in their office. It's so, once you can't even get, it's so infuriating, but people fall for it because they don't know, and they don't have time to dig through it. This is why I spend all this time, and Angela spends all of this time putting this content out. I'm sorry, Angela, I really
no, but there's so much. I mean, this topic, Xinjiang, I mean, we could spend hours on that. I just want to point out that when there was a UN vote to condemn Xinjiang, those education camps, I mean, which is probably, might be like a few tens of thousands, I don't know, 10, 20,000 people that went through that. There was not a single country that actually, a Muslim country that voted against this. Actually, there was Somalia, I think. I mean, US client state. It was just one. Why those Muslim countries didn't vote against that? It's very simple. China has found a solution for de-radicalization. What China did was to look at the root of why you have those radicals, and it was very simple. It was ignorance and poverty. So what they did a poverty alleviation program. So they opened those schools, and those schools, they showed, it looks like concentration camps and so on. You have barbed wire outside.
Yeah.
But what people don't understand, that in China, even when you look at schools and you look at factories, those barbed wires are for people not to get in, not the opposite. And those people
it's the
going
same here too.
Yeah, and those people going through those centers, I was like weekly, you have the dorms there, and you could go out in the weekends. But and they interviewed many people like this, and they were very happy because when going through the centers, you have the government, they find a solution to poverty. So you go to those centers, and you get out of this after so many months, a few months, and then you have a profession. I'm not saying that there's probably some abuses. It can happen. Abuses. Like person that were. But I think actually people were not even forced to do that. In most cases, unless you really committed crimes. I mean, people that really committed crimes. I mean, we are talking about killing people. I mean, you are terrorists. I mean, those ones, they really went probably to jail first, and then. But there's one big difference, not only for them, but for crimes in general with China. China, they really find a solution that you go to jail because they need you to prepare you for the life after jail. In the West, in the US, that's a police state. It's really a police state. You just look at the ratio. There's per capita, there's 4 to 5 times more people in prison in the US than in China. It's really
Angela,
it's a punish.
I think the total prison population is actually just totally
Yeah,
like physically bigger than China's
physically.
population.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, you're right. It's both the rates and the actual just total number of prisoners. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the, we need to ask the question: if there was a genocide in China, why there's no refugees? Just
Yeah.
think about the refugees, the amount of refugees from Syria that left. Again, and we need to look at radicals. There were really existing radicals. A lot of those radicals in Xinjiang, you know where you find them? You find them in Syria. And what the US did was to get those radicals going to Syria. And actually, many would transit to Turkey, with the help of
Yes.
Turkey. And you have, I don't know, with the estimate, it's probably 20 to 30,000. And the US was hoping that at some point, those fighters from Xinjiang fighting in Syria at some point would go back to China and just destroy everything there.
Yes.
It was a Syria. They wanted to replicate a Syria scenario, and keep in mind that Xinjiang is extremely important for China. It's the Belt and Road Initiative, and that's where China is the largest. Their large resources in gas and oil.
Yes. Really good point. And that was the plan. And for people that don't know, there is footage of these terrorist attacks carried out by the Uyghurs, and it's not for the faint of heart. It is horrific. It is the worst type of stuff you will see. So it was real, and there is footage of it. Show me footage of slaves and genocide. Please show me even one video clip. It's the year 2022. Everyone has a camera, and yet there's not a single shred of physical evidence to support any of this. This is a really important question. Aren't Uyghurs having trouble getting jobs because of Western propagandists? People are scared of being accused of using them as slave labor. Absolutely. Absolutely. There are companies that were using Uyghurs, hiring them, and they were getting a job and getting money and making a living. And they felt it would be safer to just not have any Uyghurs working for them. And so they were, taking jobs away from these people. And why? What is the ultimate goal? Angelo, you said terrorism is rooted in ignorance and poverty. Well, they want these Uyghurs who are being pulled out of poverty, pulled out of ignorance, plunged back in to go right back to extremism, because this was created by the US to divide and destroy China, and China solved it. And so they want to reintroduce this problem. Luckily, and this is just what I've heard, I'm not 100% sure, but it seems a lot of people in China are more than happy to buy products from Xinjiang and to support Uyghurs so they can make a living. What we're always talking about human rights. Isn't that their human right to make a living, Angelo?
Yeah. I want to add one more thing. They are talking about cultural genocide. I mean, I'm going to be factual. It's going to be that's so easy, because actually it's exactly the opposite. In China, you have what we call a positive discrimination, meaning that Uyghurs, they have access to higher education more easily than Han Chinese. When you pass the exam, the Gaokao exam, which is the high school exam, the requirement for Xinjiang people are lower. That's one example. The one child policy, Xinjiang people were never, they didn't have the limit that Han Chinese had. Han Chinese, they could have only one child. In Xinjiang, it was 2 to 3 children. And many other examples, the language has been preserved. You have 20,000 mosques in Xinjiang alone, 20,000. When you look at the Chinese bill, the renminbi, there's Xinjiang, Uyghur language on that bill. So if they wanted really to do a genocide on the culture, why would they do that? It's exactly the opposite. China is looking at harmony. It's very complex. There's many nationalities, but those nationalities are actually the pride of Chinese people. You need to go to China to realize that they are so proud of the diversity. It is just amazing. You go there, you have Turkish, Turkish ethnic. You have actually Thai minorities in the south. You have Koreans. You have actually some even Russian. You go up north, you have Russian minorities. So you see, it's so diverse. But that's the pride of China. it's a civilization state. That's how they look at themselves, civilization states where they share two. I mean, I don't know, proven history, 3,000 to 4,000 years. That's their pride.
I mean, the bills, the Chinese money that I had from when I traveled through it, I think it was 2007. I mean, that was way before anyone was talking about Uyghurs or Xinjiang, and the Uyghur language is on every single one of those bills. You look closely, you can see that. There's the Tibetan language. There's Mandarin, obviously, and then I think there's like another one or two. I don't remember what they are, but they're on all of their money. So again, what kind of cultural genocide is trying to erase an entire people? But the first thing they couldn't think of, hey, well, can we just erase the Uyghur language off of all of our money? Why are we still going to have it on there for erasing these people? There's something important to point out about cultural genocide. They were getting rid of certain types of mosques and certain things, but this had nothing to do with Uyghur Islam. It had to do with Salafism that was being deliberately imported from Saudi Arabia with the United States backing the whole project, because that's how you radicalize people. You introduce this extremist strain of Islam. It's not even really Islam. It's a perversion, a politically motivated perversion of Islam, and you use that to radicalize. So China was uprooting all of that and actually restoring the original Uyghur Islam, the way it has been practiced for generations. If you think about it, the U.S., with Saudi Arabia's help, importing this Salafism, that was actually cultural genocide or cultural overwriting. Maybe you could call it that, if because the word genocide has been abused so badly by the West, the media and governments. Here's one. What about Tibet? Angelo, I have something I want to show regarding Tibet. Angelo, you want to get started while you look for that?
Well, Tibet, the reality, I think it's about looking at history, but this whole Free Tibet movement has been financed by the CIA. You have in the 50s and 60s, you had the National Endowment for Democracy. Actually, back then was the CIA. The CIA was directly funding the Dalai Lama, and actually the Dalai Lama doesn't deny this. There's even a biography about the Dalai Lama from his brother that actually admits that one of the biggest mistakes that the Dalai Lama did was to accept CIA money. And the problem I want to believe that the Dalai Lama has regressed to do that. It actually goes back to what we were saying. Once you start being an agent, you start accepting US money, you are just hijacked. You have no way out of this. So he accepted that money, became an agent, and now the problem is that I think he wished that he could actually make peace with China and go back to Tibet and just go back to the normality they had. There's a relationship, very very good relationship between the Dalai Lama and the central government in Beijing.
Patching things up.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, he's kind of thinking twice about what he did, and he I think if you went to Tibet, you've been to Tibet, haven't you, Angelo?
Yeah. I've been 2 times in Tibet, 27 years ago and 5-6 years ago. Yeah.
Yeah. So how much more horrible has it become under the oppressive regime of this evil CCP? Are people they just put bars on their house so they can't get out? Just villages that are turned into prisons. What did it look like, Angelo, when you went there?
Well, it's interesting how the West is saying, well, we should preserve the lifestyle of Tibetans, and actually there's not much change. One of the biggest differences is poverty alleviation. So you see, there's probably when I was there was probably, I don't know, but a huge part of the population. I mean, probably 20% of the population, they were nomads. You had they had their yaks and they would go, according to the seasons, and they didn't have any house. So now with the poverty alleviation program, Chinese, they gave them the option. Oh, well, we are going to help you build a house. And actually you can have both. You could have during a certain season, you can be in your house, and then you can actually take your yaks, your cattle, and go around just to feed your cattle. But so you see, I mean, it's interesting how the West wants Tibetans to be still traditional but traditionally, in a sense, poor. They want to
Yeah,
be able
or
to go on a safari, the same as they go to Africa, and they wish they go there. Oh, it's still primitive. They've maintained their tradition and so on. Meaning, you know what? It's good to be the white guy, rich, and I'm going to see how they're living in a small village with no roads, no shoes, no electricity.
no electricity. Yeah.
That's what we want for Tibetans. I was talking to Tibetans, and they were like, you know what? We want to have a house. We want to be able to send our kids to school. Then I think there are a few things. When we talk about Sinicization of Tibet, you only have 3 cities where you have. There are lots of Han Chinese merchants and so on. There's Lhasa, Shigatse, Regatse. Those are the 3 biggest cities. I think the proportion of Han Chinese, is probably 30 to 40%. So that's a fact. But then Tibet is a huge place. The rest of Tibet is extremely well preserved. The tradition, everything. It is just amazing. And actually, it's interesting how they're preserving those places. Actually, they don't want too many tourists, just to commercialize Tibet. But then situation is a bit strict. If you are a foreigner, you want to go to Tibet, it's strict. It's interesting. In Xinjiang, you don't have restrictions at all. You go to Tibet, it's more sensitive. So it's more difficult to travel. But I would say overall very positive. Again, just because life is better there now in Tibet. Just because just roads. I remember there was now you have the train. You can go all the way by train to Tibet. If you had to go to Tibet 27 years ago, it was by flight. And even the airport, from the airport to the city, it was a mud road back then.
Yeah.
Mud road.
Yeah.
I mean, everything from infrastructure, quality of life, figures talk. You have to look at the right benchmark, level of education, life expectancy. 50 years ago in Tibet, life expectancy was 40 years old. Now it's probably around 70 years old. Well, those are human rights. I mean, yes. I don't know how the West, in the US, it has declined over the last 2 years. It has declined by 1 year. Is that human rights? And I think we need to look at the right benchmark. In the West, we tend to look at the wrong benchmark. But
these are all really good points, Angelo. And I kind of want to talk about Lao also. And it's a very similar story. If you're in a rush, Angelo, and you have to go, we could start.
No, I'm good.
Okay. So here's a little comment. So anyone who is critical of the CCP, well, there's no such thing as the CCP. There's the Communist Party of China. CCP is what Western detractors call it. So, and this is, you could almost set your watch to this. If someone says CCP, you could almost guarantee some sort of anti-China or illogical or ridiculous comment will follow. So anyone who is critical of the CCP is immediately called a CIA agent, like the West calling me a Putin troll for calling out Zelensky. Now, no. It's because if you go to state.gov, the U.S. State Department's official website, you go to the Office of the Historian, and you look at documents from 1964, this is the first sentence. Review of Tibetan operations summary. The CIA Tibetan activity consists of political action, propaganda, and paramilitary activity, which means giving them guns to kill people. We're calling them CIA agents because they are literally CIA agents, and the US government itself in its own documents made publicly available to all to read if they want to. It's there. That's why we call them CIA agents, because they literally are. Now, when someone calls me a Putin troll or a Kremlin bot, where do they have evidence that even comes close to comparing to what I'm showing you on the screen right here? And this is just scratching the surface. They have one after the other talking about bringing in weapons and how we got to keep the free Tibet thing alive as long as possible, even if China succeeds in crushing all of our armed terrorists that we've sent in there. I mean, it's just one after the other. And again, I tell people, if you're wondering what I think about Tibet, go to my channel, type in Tibet, and these are all videos that I've done. And every single one of these, I put the references, the primary sources that I'm getting this information from. I show you where these organizations are funded by the US government. I'm not just saying it. I'm showing you that they are funded by the US government. The National Endowment for Democracy admittedly took over these type of jobs from the CIA. And if you go to the NED's website today, you will find a section where they are still funding programs involving Tibet, not in Tibet, because of course China has uprooted them from there, as any country would when faced with foreign-sponsored separatism, armed separatism at that. The Tibet, those were rebels with weapons that the U.S. was arming to try to overthrow and push out the Chinese from. You can look back all throughout history, Tibet, Xinjiang, all of these places, Taiwan, these have all been places that have been part of China. You can find some point in history where temporarily they weren't, but they have, for the most part, been part of China. So, Angelo, you got anything to add to that? Are you just calling them CIA agents because you're a CCP shill, Angelo, or is it because we've done the research?
No, exactly, because we don't know. And again, you're showing official website from the State Department. I mean, what else do they want? I just want to add one thing, just to be objective. China did have some really tough time, especially the Cultural Revolution. But those are internal matters. There were abuses then, and China suffered a lot. But that is China affairs, and I think everything is linked. They went through a very tough time from the liberation. There was a feudal state, they had a civil war. It was actually still unfinished in 1940 up to 1949. There's this tension with Taiwan, and between that there were the Great Leap Forward. Many people died. You had the Cultural Revolution, but those are internal matters. China had to go through that. And it is because they went through that, and through 1979, the opening up of China and the reforms, and then 1989, you had Tiananmen Square. They went through very big hardships. This is why, when you look at this history since 1949, I mean, even before, feudal state, all the way to 1989, China needs, this is why they are they are so careful when it comes to unity and stability. China, they want stability, and they want growth, and they want some prosperity because they've gone through those stages, And I like to associate what we're living here now in the West, We actually living through different new cultural revolution. We are going to do the same wrong steps that China did actually in the 60s and in the 60s. All those movements about identity, BLM, LGTB, and so on, it looks so much like China did back then. They wanted to deconstruct society. That's what they wanted to do in the Cultural Revolution. They did a mistake. They know about this, and they don't talk much about it, because it's a bit of shame, also the Civil War, but we need to look at, not do a snapshot of China, but really understand its history and the direction it's going. And it's going in a very good direction. Those are facts. China is, just the prosperity, people are longevity, and so on. We need to look at those benchmarks. Yep.
Well, these are all good points. And I saw someone ask me about Falun Gong, and I put in, just again, type it in the search thing. I've done a video on Falun Gong. I showed all of the U.S. connection behind that. These are cultists. They are cultists. They are racist cultists. They are homophobic. If you look through their belief system, their guru, their leader, whoever this guy is, he was just unhinged. And if you look into it, you could say, well, maybe that was just back then. But if you ask a Falun Gong practitioner now about that, they will still make the same excuses about it. They will not condemn it and say, well, that was a long time ago. We've kind of grown up since then. No, they still defend it. So, look into it. Don't tell me about Falun Gong and all of these things that you've heard, again, in the Western media. I promise you, they lied about Iraq. They lied about Libya, Syria. We've just showed you they're lying about Xinjiang, Tibet, I promise you, they're also lying about Falun Gong. That is not the first thing they're telling the truth about. Now, someone's asking about Haiti and Iran. I have to be honest. I cover the East. I live in the East. I don't know that much about Haiti. I could tell you this, since we're talking about a first time for everything. I can promise you, this is not the first time the U.S. is thinking about some sort of military intervention out of the goodness of their heart. Haiti is just another country, in America's backyard that will never get up and running because the U.S. will not let them. They will knock it down every time they try to do something. Iran, I know a lot more about. Angela, do you know? Are you familiar with the situation in Haiti?
Well, it's been a client state. There's at some point there was the Liberate. I think it was Aristide. And they did everything just to make it. I think he had to leave at some point, but there was always this meddling and just make sure that it's divided, stay porous, because it's a danger. The last thing you want to have on your doorstep is a second Cuba. So they did everything just to keep it poor. And you had the promises. There was I don't know if you remember the earthquake, and you had Clinton going there, and it was a huge operation of money laundering. No, there was not a single penny going to Haitians. So they've made sure that the Haitians were kept really, really poor. It's probably the poorest country in the whole region.
And regarding Iran, again, this is something that I have covered for years and years, and I've made it my task to go through these policy papers that the U.S. government, funds these organizations to put out these policy papers. It was from 2009. It was titled "Which Path to Persia" from the Brookings Institution. I have people who's like, Brian, please stop talking about it. But you'd be surprised how many people have never heard about it. Again, if you go to my channel, you type in Iran, you will see me talk about this. And in that paper, they talk about, we're going to use terrorists to overthrow the Iranian government. We're going to back revolutions. We're going to take unpopular opposition groups. We're going to make them popular because we can control the media. We're going to pump money into the media. We're going to hit them economically. This is, remember, 2009. We're even going to make a deal with Iran, make it look like we want peace with Iran. Then we are going to sabotage it, blame Iran, and use that as a pretext for more aggression. They said, absolutely, you won't believe your eyes when you read it, but I swear this is in Which Path to Persia. Just type it in, and the first result should be a free PDF that you can download and read and see for yourself. And I have people tell me, Brian, Iran, it's a dictatorship. They're so harsh. They control everything. They have more or less been at war or proxy war with the West for decades. For decades. This is a country that has been under siege for decades. Their economy targeted for destruction by the most powerful nations on earth for decades. It's like you're not going on a weekend camp out. You're in the trench in the middle of a war. You have to run things a little bit differently. There's two ways to run a country. When everything is peaceful and stable, you can run it one way, and when you're constantly at war for decades, you run it another way. It's the same thing with Myanmar, and I'm not saying that there aren't things that happen that are bad. Most certainly there are, but you have to remember what circumstances is this happening under. When the U.S. does it, they have all of these advantages over everyone else, and yet they still torture. They still mass murder. They still lie to people. They jail journalists. What is the excuse for that? And if you can make an excuse for that or look the other way regarding that and believe the U.S. when they talk about Iran, I just don't get it. Why people don't understand. It's not like in your country. Also, I know people who live in Iran, and just like everywhere else that I've heard about it, and then I traveled there, you can see that most of the time, most people are just living out their life more or less the same way you and I do. And it's just when these political issues are touched or political opposition starts getting involved. And the vast majority of the political opposition that is being promoted by the Western media is, again, sponsored by the U.S. And again, it is Western media and Western documents that prove all of this. Angelo, what about Iran?
By Iran, I think we need to go back a little bit in history. Well, remember that there was a point where we were actually financing Saddam Hussein to fight Iran. That's not
Yes.
so long ago, and it was just terrible. So it was the strategy to divide and conquer. But keep in mind, just why did we go against Iran on the first place? Is that we used to have a U.S. puppet, the Shah of Iran, that actually Iran, the Shah had sold his country. I mean, was managed by U.S. British firms. I mean, all the oil and the wealth, and what the revolutionary did when there was a revolution, they actually nationalized the oil, and that's why the collective West went against Iran. The same as Venezuela. Once you had Chavez in power, he said, "Well, we are going to give back the oil to the people," and they went against Chavez. So it's all about, can we rape the country or not? Myanmar was the same.
Yes.
Remember this paper? We found this paper in 2005. There was a task force. In that task force, there was George Soros and USAID. I mean, all those gangsters, and
Yes.
they just planned, how are we going to rape this country? They call this liberalize. In reality, liberalization, it's how am I going to rape your country, steal state-owned assets.
Yes, I mean, Myanmar is just off the charts transparent. I just flashed a question on the screen about, can the Iranian government withstand it? They have withstood so much done to their country. I do believe they're going to get through this. More and more other nations are not afraid to lend a helping hand to Iran and vice versa. Could you imagine Russia and Iran sharing any type of military technology like that? I guess it was happening, but more and more often, I'm starting to see nations just not care about what the U.S. Threatens them with anymore. I think they will withstand it. These terrorist attacks that you see, I can show you in the Brookings Institution's paper where they are talking about terrorist organizations listed by the U.S. State Department as a foreign terrorist organization, the MEK, the Mujahideen al-Khali. And they had killed Americans. That's why they were on the terrorist list. And yet they're talking about MEK using them against the Iranian government, how unpopular they are, but how fanatical they are. They could use them to overthrow the government. And they're like, but before we do that, we'd have to, come out with a narrative to get them off the terrorist list. And then we could use them. They did the same thing with the East Turkestan Islamic movement, also in Xinjiang, China. They did the same thing with the Libyan Islamic movement in Libya. These were Al-Qaeda Libya edition, and they took them off the terror list so that they could more openly use them and send them to Syria. I mean, this is a very common theme in U.S. foreign policy. Angela, do you have anything to add to that? The use
Well,
of
additional the Azov too. I mean, the Azov.
Azov, yes.
In 2014, they were exposing their crimes. Even Amnesty International, they were very vocal. And overnight, what happened in 2000? I mean, a year ago, it's just the Azov became the freedom fighters. So it's just a big hypocrisy.
And how could I forget Al Qaeda and ISIS itself?
Oh, yeah.
These are it's so obvious. Everyone knows that the U.S. is behind them. Hopefully, I mean they were ferrying them around in Syria. That was their the freedom fighters in Syria were actually Al Qaeda and ISIS. And you have to remember, again, people are like, no, they're getting donations from Twitter. They're stealing the guns. That's how they have weapons and money. No, you cannot sustain something that big by Twitter donations and stealing guns. They had airplane loads of weapons coming into Turkey, courtesy of the CIA, reported by the New York Times and Washington Post, crossing the border into Syria, and this is who they were giving it to. And they claimed that it was a bad. They had a very inefficient vetting system. Can you imagine the CIA? We're not sure if we're giving them to freedom fighters or Al Qaeda.
We're
not sure.
I mean, just recent history. CBS, they did a documentary about the the weapons being shipped to Ukraine, and they were saying, I don't know what was the percentage, but there's a very high percentage that actually goes into the black market. And I think my bet is that we are this whole thing about financing supporting, training neo-Nazis is going to backfire to Europe. The same as the funding Al Qaeda, it backfired. We are going to have a new generation in Europe that are going to be criminals. I don't know if you remember, but when there was a Yugoslavian war, the Balkanization of Yugoslavia, well, you had the Albanian mafia that took over the organized crime in Europe. The human trade, like prostitution and drugs, was managed by those Albanian mafia, which actually they were funded in the first place by the US. And that organization, remember the UCECA in Kosovo, they shifted from being a terrorist organization to being a legitimate organization. Why? Because they were willing to fight against Serbia.
Yes. So again, over and over and over again, and all of these loose weapons, like in Libya, where did they send them? To Syria. So whenever they're done with Ukraine, wherever the U.S. targets next, that's probably where all these loose weapons and fanatics are going to be sent next. It's basically America's foreign legion of terrorist criminals and Nazis. Here's a good question. I think this is a good question, Angelo. Yeah. What do you think of those foreign YouTubers that have lived in China, initially supporting them, being very critical? The guy from South Africa comes to mind. I felt like it was a waste of time to continuously point out the dumb, dishonest things that he was deliberately saying, because he would say something like, there's no black people on movie posters in China. So I would do a video where I would ask someone living in China, can you just, I know it sounds stupid, go to the theater, show me what movie poster they've got up for Dune. And sure enough, it has 2 black women on it, as a matter of fact. And so he's just a liar, and he's repeating lies that dovetail perfectly in, or are just repeating, U.S. State Department lies about China. It's very lucrative. The West has a lot of racist people who want to hear that China is inferior, it's going to collapse tomorrow, because it makes them feel insecure. They're running the show, and they don't want this country with 5 times more people than the G7 combined, surpassing them and standing up to them. They want to be able to kick other people around, kick them when they're down. And I have a funny feeling that these people, when they were in China, enjoyed the fact that China was behind. And then as it was catching up, they soured to it. I see the same thing happening here in Thailand. These expats come here and they think they're going to be carried through the streets in a rickshaw and use humans as footrests. And when they find out that, no, it's actually a recently industrialized country, and they're not interested in what you have to say, you're a guest here and you will act like a guest here, or you can leave, they don't need you, they have a meltdown and they become very bitter and angry towards the country and its people, simply because they do what they would do if they were in their country and someone came and treated them the same way. Angelo, yeah, I know you have experience.
Yeah, I think it's a good example. That is true. 20 years ago in China, you'd be a foreigner, you'd have a really good life. You had lots of low-educated foreigners where they were kind of what I call losers back home. Didn't have even a university degree. They would actually end up teaching high school, even just having a very good salary, good life, and actually you were treated as someone special. So and they could have, they could have a girlfriend and so on. So they had a good life. They were making 2-3 times what Chinese were making, and they made you feel special. You had some privileges, but it's over. Now you have the Chinese are becoming wealthier and they have their pride. And actually now, if you are foreigner in China, you are going to be treated the same as locals. And I think some of them, they were frustrated because of that. They started with those privileges and maybe they didn't have that. And at some point they left, and because they had the YouTube channels, they needed to make a living. And how can you make a living if you are? It's easy. It was easier for them to do bashing on China just because of the algorithm. And I guess some people are willing in the West just to finance those guys. And I don't know if there's more money coming from some institution or so on, but it seems like I mean, just look at the figures. We are talking about Sapenza, right? He has how many followers does he have on YouTube? Is it 1 million?
I would hesitate to even say that they need to be paid by someone, because, like I said, I am an American. I grew up in the U.S. I know that a lot of Americans, not all Americans, but a lot of Americans are just plain racist. And then when it comes to Asia and the Chinese in particular, they're extremely insecure about China's rise. And so someone like him trashing China and petting them on the head, it's okay. They're not going to surpass us. They're going to collapse. What, 30 days, the economy is going to collapse. They've been saying this every month for like 5 years now. They will get a huge audience. And they will get people paying them to hear what they want to hear. That's how this whole thing works. They don't go against the grain. Remember, they're working with the system. The U.S. State Department is also saying all of this. So they have a nice, safe, easy way to generate huge amounts of income and attention. I don't think they need anyone to pay them, honestly.
Yeah, I just want to add, I mean, this is really important for me to say it. I'm not an unconditional lover of China. I mean, I love the country, but I love more my own country. I mean, I have to be honest. I love my country. And actually, it's because I love my country that I don't want it to have a wrong perception about China, because that perception is leading us towards war. But I'm not unconditional lover of China. Absolutely not. You need to keep in mind that China doesn't have my back. Neither Russia. No. I'm actually speaking out. But what I want is just to get the facts out, and somehow, just by living in China for so long, I think I have a legitimate voice to say the reality there. It's not a perfect reality, but it's not what the West is picturing China.
Here's a comment. I like China, but I don't want to live their way. How do they live? Have you been there? Or are you just going off of what you're seeing on TV? Because even the whole health thing, we will not mention what this health thing is. Even that is highly misunderstood in the West. Unless you've been there and you've experienced yourself, you really can't say you wouldn't want to live that way, because you have no idea how it is to live there. I've been to China, and it's exactly like absolutely everywhere else I've been, except better infrastructure. And safer streets.
Can I give you an example, Brian? It's one of those things that, I mean, the happy life, Chinese lifestyle that actually correspond to them. I'll give you an example. In the evening, in summertime, you have hundreds of people, they gather into a square and they dance. They dance together and they're very, very happy. You know what? It doesn't fit my lifestyle. We're different. We're just different. But I've never seen people so happy. You know what? That's their lifestyle. They love eating, like in the streets. I mean, that's so different, So when you have a foreigner looking at them and saying, "Oh, I wouldn't want to live that lifestyle," just are they happy or not? And you go into the street and you see like people happy, and there's one big difference, that these people are positive about the future. They've experienced continuous growth. Their life is better and better. They have more opportunities. I mean, keep in mind that they are, I don't know what is the figure. I think 160 million people are Chinese that travel abroad every year. You know what? They all go back. If China was bad, do you think they would go back? You know what? Now, if you go for Chinese, if you go abroad and you work in a restaurant, you are a loser. They tell you're a loser. It's not like in the 70s. If you were to be able to go abroad, you'll be like, oh my God, you dream, you're living the Western dream. Now, you know what? Opportunities are in China. There's so much you can do in China, so many opportunities. It's a society that is constantly changing at the speed you wouldn't believe it. When I'm in China, I see changes overnight. So if you go one time, I mean, you go today and you go back next year, everything will have changed again, So it's going really, really fast. And it is intimidating, really. I think when I say all those good things about China, I say it, but with a sense of envy a little bit. As a foreigner, I do wish that my country could actually learn from that. Just because I see tangible things, infrastructure. people living a good life, and so on. And I think we have so many misconceptions. We should learn from what they're doing. I wish the politicians in the West could do just a small fraction of what they're doing in China. They're living, not selling dreams. Politicians in the West, they're telling us what people want to hear. Once they're elected, well, you know what? That's it. Elect and regret. Vicious circle.
Yes, and China actually has sent people overseas to other countries to learn from their system, learn the way they do things, and take whatever good ideas they really think will work back in China and implement them. Could you imagine the West ever doing that? They're too proud. The people running things right now are too proud. I want to put this up here. U.S. racism is a lie. I mean, are you kidding me? They literally would not let black people drink out of the same drinking fountains as white people. They had to sit in the back of the bus. Do you think that all of that just disappeared from people are still alive that had that happen to them? You think that that whole ugly, actual, very real, undeniable racism has been completely buried? Now, get real. And honestly, I know people who say this to me. I'm an American. I lived in America. I grew up in America. I saw it around me everywhere I went. Don't tell me it's a lie. It doesn't exist. Get it. I like, where does Angela, when someone says that, where do you think they're coming from? I honestly have no idea.
I mean, we need to be factual, and this is it's very recent history. I mean, look at the proportion of, look at how migrants, they're treated, at the border. You have huge camps. They're living, like hundreds of people living in the same rooms. You have children separated from their parents. The prison population, you see, and actually we're talking about slave labor. It's slave labor is not in China, it's in the US. They make less than $1. I don't know if is it an hour or a day. I mean, it's just ridiculous. They get the money for the cigarettes. So
but there's so many people who say, Brian, there's no racism in America. Like, where were you in America where you didn't see it? I saw it in school. I saw it when I was in the Marine Corps. I saw it as racist people. I mean, like dropping words that you couldn't say. You can't say publicly because it's just so vicious and racist. And I heard people talking like this all the time. Is that so? That's not right? Am I imagining it? I honestly, I don't. And there's so many people that have this, and they're leaning to the right, and they feel like, white people are being discriminated against, which in the US right now, I would say the government, the interests are weaponizing race, and they're pitting everyone against each other. That is undeniable. And it's on both sides now. But don't dare tell me there's no racism in America. Wake up. It's just a coincidence that all the millions of people they've killed around the world are all brown. Just a coincidence. Oh,
I think you pointed
out, but they're Slavs, so they don't count. I mean, this is how they think. Sorry.
You mentioned like weaponizing race. Typically, the BLM movement, we need to be extremely careful. There was actually a weapon. It's just a divide and control weapon. Ultimately, what did he achieve with BLM? Absolutely nothing. But it was just to divide people.
Oh, they did accomplish something. They divided everyone against each other. They distracted them on both sides, and nobody is talking about the moneyed interests running everything into the ground. They're too busy with their different isms and making sure their ism they think is going to be on the top and eliminate everyone else. And it's on both sides. I mean, I'm not saying that that's not a thing. That's definitely a thing, but that's what they're doing. Just as you say, Angelo, they're dividing people.
Do you have any more?
It's not even race. It's not even Republican versus Democrat. Again, it's
no.
The easiest way to explain this is it's like professional wrestling, where there's a script written. You have guys play the good guy, guys play the bad guy. They fight in the ring. After the match, they all go out and drink beer together, and they all enjoy all of this money that they're making with this form of entertainment. And U.S. politics is very similar to that. I'm not going to say that everyone is in on it, but it is a process where even if you're in it and you think you're dedicated to, say, the Republicans or the Democrats, you're like those fans in the audience who really think Hulk Hogan is the good guy, and whoever, and I don't really follow
Yeah.
professional wrestling. The most ironic thing is Trump was literally involved in professional wrestling before he got involved in U.S. politics. How did people not see this? I don't know.
I just wish we mentioned this, but I think we need to keep on mentioning this. I mean, we are against those labels. It's just this is a divide and control. It's not Republicans against the Democrats. It's not pro-choice against the opposite. It's not about BLM or the conservative. I mean, this is a divide and control. Keep in mind, whenever you actually go into a label ism, you are putting yourself into a box. And people don't know the difference. You put yourself into a box. I say, oh, I am communist. What do you achieve with that? You separate it. You don't keep in mind, this is a fight, people against the elites.
Yes.
And it's about the globalist agenda and anti-imperialism. So once you start saying, I'm anti-imperialist, but I'm socialist, then you lost it completely. You lost it. I'm not saying, socialist maybe is the way, but you need to focus on the fight. Fight is people against the elites. Then once you put yourself into a box, you playing their games. Because ultimately, if you look at what unites people, you have people voting Democrats and Republicans, but they could be so much united to fight against the elites. They don't realize that they're playing their games. And by definition, actually, voting in this system is actually giving legitimacy to a fake democracy. Really, we need to go to the foundation of what is democracy. Really, democracy, demokratos, it means power to the people. And then we need to really look at the definition. Just go back. Are you giving really the power to the people? If the rules of the games were written by the elites, well, they control the outcome. Whoever writes the rules of the game control the outcome. Why would you play in a game like this? They need to rewrite the rules of the game, and it needs to be written by the people. So those rules should protect the people against the abuses of the elites. But all along, it's been hijacked by the elites. Doesn't matter who. I mean, Rishi Sunak was elected. Did you have a say? How dare you call it a democracy? I mean, how absurd is that? Just absurd, People, they need to go at the foundation of what it means to have a democracy. And I like how you mentioned that posting a ballot, it's a release valve.
Yeah.
It gives us a kind of sense, oh, I have some power to decide. You don't. You have two choices that are actually fine, that are going to obey to the people that fund them, but they're not going to listen to you.
And
then you want to lecture. Yeah, but then you want to go to the other side of the world and lecture China? I mean, come on. Deal with your own shit, really. Sorry about my French.
And when you're doing this election thing, you vote and you're like, I voted for Trump, but Biden is president. I'll just wait 4 years and then we'll fix it then. And when Obama was running the first time, not the second time, he wasn't fooling anyone the second time. The first time he was saying how he's going to get us out of the wars. He was going to turn things around. Trump did the exact same thing. But when they got into power, what did they do? What they did they get into power, or were they just a figurehead while an unelected circle of interests who have been running the same policy spanning decades just continued doing it, but just with a different narrative? And this is the thing. This is how they get you with establishment parties, the left and the right. And now with all the wokeism and all of these new isms, because they know trust in these two parties is waning. So they create all of these. They fall back to their trenches, the ones they dug behind them, and they've got all of these new categories that people can fall into that they'll still be controlling ultimately. Whether you're on the left or you're on the right, I guarantee you're supporting at least part of the agenda, whether it's going after Russia or going after China or going after Iran. As long as you fall into one of these categories that are gung-ho for war and interference overseas, meddling, then you're still supporting it. So you might feel strongly about us interfering in Ukraine, but then you're going to vote for someone who is going to continue the conflict, the growing tension with China. So what difference are you actually going to make? I don't see it.
No, absolutely. I just want to dig a little bit. There was a very interesting movement in France. I don't know if you follow the Yellow Vest, but it's very interesting because for them it was they redefined democracy. They in reality, when you elect someone, it's very anti-democratic move because you are giving up your right to vote. I mean, you vote for laws. So when you vote for law, you really decide for, you make decisions, really tangible decisions. When you elect someone, you give up your right to vote for the next 4 to 5 years. So you entrust someone on your rights, democratic rights. So in reality, the ultimate democratic right is the right to vote, and that's what we call direct democracy. And that's what you have. That's why you have, referendums. That a system like Switzerland, it's a mix direct and indirect democracy. So, but the collective West, Western style democracy, they don't want that, because once you have that, you can revoke your elected officials. Just think about it. If in the US you have a president like Biden, and he promised when before being elected, he promised healthcare for all, right? He's elected and then he doesn't follow through. Well, you got 100,000 signatures, or it could be a million signatures, and then people can revoke him, can put him down, and because the problem we have in the collective West is that there's no accountability at all.
Absolutely.
And there are no preconditions for democracy. I mean, precondition of democracy is sovereignty. You need to have unbiased media. You should never have money to politics. People should have a certain level of education, civic education. I mean, all those preconditions. And then if you have that, well, maybe we might start talking about democracy. But what we have is just, I'd rather be in a responsible dictatorship if it should be in those fake democracy, which is by the 1% for the 1%.
Angelo, check this out. Interesting. So if you don't vote, you think you will get a government by magic. A good government by magic. What I'm saying is thinking that voting is going to get you a good government, that is thinking, believing in magic, because you can see every politician in Washington is beholden to these corporations who are not going to risk their plans that span years, decades. They're not going to risk all of this every 4 years. The people presented to you as candidates, these are people that have been selected beforehand. How many people heard of Barack Obama before they put him forward as a candidate for president? Hardly anyone knew who he was. It is a system of control. Democracy in the West is a system of control. No matter who you vote for, you're not going to change anything. If you want to change something, you have to look at the interests that are controlling this system, and you have to find alternatives. Instead of giving your money every month to these corporations that demonstrably run everything, give your money to a company locally. Find if you have no choice, you have to pick like between 3 big companies. Pick the one that seems the least offensive, or the least invasive, or the least influential over Washington. We have to start thinking about this, because that's where they got their power from. All of us giving it to them by paying into their corporations, their services, putting our money into their financial institutions. That's where they got all this power from. And if you notice, how is it that China and Russia are changing this and bringing multipolarism out and chipping away at Western hegemony? How are they doing it? By protesting? No. By voting for someone? No. They're doing it by creating an alternative system, alternative companies in aerospace, engineering, energy production, hydrocarbons, everything that you could imagine, different social media platforms, everything that you can think of. They are putting forth alternatives that people can pay into instead of the West. And you could see how it's diluting the power that the West has over the planet. You can see it every year. You can see more and more how that is changing things. That's the way we have to start thinking. I don't pretend I have a list of things that you can do to instantly change everything, but I can tell you for a fact that if you start investing in alternatives and we all start doing this collectively, it will slowly but surely help tilt everything towards multipolarism. There is no overnight way to do it. Thinking you're going to vote for someone and fix everything when he gets inaugurated, he or she gets inaugurated, that is magical thinking.
Yeah, and I think it should be a uniting system, not a dividing system. Keep in mind that the problems in democracies is what we call the mob rule. Can you imagine when you have 51% that is going to rule at the expense of 49%? This is an extreme case scenario, but that's the reality. That's what can happen. Imagine just if they were managing in Ukraine, they say, well, you are minority, you are 30-40% of Russian speaking, we are going to destroy you. That's democracy? Yes, okay, that's democracy. But you know what? Does it make sense? I mean, like the mob rule, a majority going to kill them. You just make it legal. You could make legal to kill Russians. You can make it legal. You can say, well, I didn't break the law because the law is we can kill Russians. That's the reality right now. That's the reality. With martial law now, look at Ukraine. They suppressed all the oppositions. They're doing killing openly. They're saying we are going to kill whoever gets help from Russians. So you see, we need to. You see, that's the difference with China. They're looking at how it can be uniting, find a common purpose, and actually set aside the differences. We work out the differences, but why should it be dividing? Why should it be dividing? When I hear in China just the term shared prosperity, you don't need to call it socialism. If you talk about shared prosperity, either to Republicans, average Joe, you tell him share prosperity. We have a cake. We need to focus on making this cake bigger, and we are going to benefit all of us. Rather than the current system is, I want to keep the cake really small, but I want all for me.
Yeah.
Share prosperity, that's inspiring. But I don't need to put a label. You see the difference? I don't need to put a label. And then you have everybody that would agree with me. Share prosperity, of course. Let's make the society better. Have a common dream. Hey, when is the last time in the West, in the collective West, Western democracies, where you have inspiring speeches? Not only speeches, but action. A common dream for our nation. We want to build up something special, big project. Well, you know what? In China, they're planning for the next 50 years, for the next generation. That's why, I'm not saying I want a Chinese system, but can we try to learn a little bit from what they're doing? What is the common dream? What is the common dream we have? We talk about the next election. We were fooled the last 3-4 elections. Do you look forward for the next election? People don't believe it anymore. And there's no, what is it for our society? Where are we going? What is, they're selling, what they're selling us now? This gender X, identity, and so on. That's what they're selling us. They're teaching our kids, they're planting ideas, oh, you know what? Now you're a boy, but maybe you don't know. Maybe you'll be a girl. Is it education?
This is the thing. If they can float some intangible thing in front of you and convince you that this is something that you want, they don't have to talk about building railways, bridges, ports, factories. They don't have to talk about any of that, and then they can just keep doing what they're doing. They don't have to reinvest back in the country. When you hear politicians in Asia talk, they're talking about specific projects that when they're finished, they will be tangible and you can touch it. When's the last time a U.S. politician was talking about something tangible that would actually happen? I just to clear this, here's John. He wants to know, what about the Chinese real estate investors who could not travel by air, train, or bus because their travel permissions were turned red? They wanted to travel to demonstrations against the banks. Where did you hear this? Source, please show me the source, because this is the thing. These anti-China platforms, these media platforms, the Western media, you know how easy it is to just tell a lie and convince people that, yeah, that's going on, when there's no one that can challenge them and ask for evidence. And you will spend every single waking moment doing the research and proving that all of these things aren't true. You will never be able to keep up with it because it takes time to research and prove something. It takes no time at all to tell a lie. And so the West knows this. Gives them the advantage. It's always easier to destroy than to build. This is an advantage that they have. So if you're going to ask me a question, please give me the source where you heard this and what evidence they presented. And if there is no evidence, then what do you think? It's made up.
I think they're mentioning, there were some bank frauds. I mean, it's a continent. China is a huge continent. You have frauds, you have some corruption cases and so on. There's a huge difference. In China, if you make banking fraud, it's what we call white collar crimes, you go to jail. When it's a politician doing corruption, being caught on corruption, we are talking about the death penalty.
Yeah.
When is the last time you had politicians in the West going to jail? They've made the laws so that they can be protected. I give you just one case. I don't know if you're familiar with but Sarkozy. The campaign of Sarkozy was financed by Gaddafi. Gaddafi gave 50 million. There's a very well-known media called Mediapart in France. Gaddafi gave 50 million euro for the campaign of Sarkozy. Sarkozy, he has other corruption cases and so on, but he still lives in his big villa in Paris. Those guys never go to jail. And it's going to drag on for years and years, but ultimately they won't go to jail. They are protected. In China, they want to make it an example. They make it an example. You need to hit very hard. People see that, and if you are a politician and you are tempted by being corrupt, taking some money, well, you know what? You're going to think twice. And I want to add up one thing, is that what they call lobbyism in the West, which is legalized, in China, they call it corruption. You do go to jail for that. So I'm not saying China is not perfect, but you see, they do so many things that are better. Just corruption. They've been tough on that. I'm not for the death penalty, but maybe that's the only way, and it's getting better. Because of that, it's getting better. And this is one of the contributions of Xi Jinping. Why do you think people love Xi Jinping in China? Because China used to be extremely corrupt. Xi Jinping came in and he was like big hammer on corruption. And he hit extremely high. The people that they were put in jail, and actually they had the death penalty, they were extremely high, leaders, like the regional level. So can't we learn from that? Really, yeah.
I mean, do you know, like, a lot of these corrupt businessmen and politicians that were getting caught up in all of that, a lot of them fled to the U.S. and now they're, they're the pundit that they always go to, oh, he's Chinese and he's going to tell you how horrible China is. It's because he got caught in the act. He was going to get in trouble. He lost everything that he stole in China. He's hiding overseas in the West. And there's a lot of Russian oligarchs that do this. This Mikhail Khodorkovsky, he was so corrupt and he fled. And who's the other one? He's an American, but he changed his citizenship to British to evade taxes in the U.S. And now I forget what his name is, but it's all tied to that.
That's a Yeltsin era. That's the Yeltsin era. They raped the country. I mean, why do you think the collective West loved Yeltsin? Because he made those multinational extremely rich. They were selling state-owned assets, and overnight becoming billionaires. Came in Putin. I mean, he sat down with those oligarchs, and there's a video on that. When he takes them one by one, he said, "You are going to be out of politics."
Yeah.
He could have gone. If he was China, I don't know if you remember that video. Yeah.
Bill Browder is this American who changed his citizenship to evade taxes in the U.S. and then he
changed his name too. What did he change his name to? Or
No. It's Bill Browder, but this person
okay,
is close enough. I think it's just a typo. But thank you for Vitaly. Thank you for
you.
that. He was in Russia robbing Russia, and the Russian authorities cracked down on him. So now he's had this axe to grind against Russia. He's one of the most ridiculous voices out there. Just he'll make up anything about Russia because he's angry because they stole all of his well, they didn't steal, they took back all of his ill-gotten gains, and they taught him a lesson. And in the West, he's a man used to impunity. And people who think they have impunity, they don't react well when someone puts them in their place. And so this is going to be something he carries to his grave.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing. You see sometimes those expat communities. The people from Iran, they left from Iran. Those were elites. So there are expats around the world. But so you have also the Venezuelan, you have the Cubans. They were all like people. They were benefiting from a system of for the elites, and those were the elites. And those ones, when you meet Cubans in the US, they are not representative of the Cuban in Cuba because they were benefiting from a corrupt system that was put in place. So we need to be extremely careful. The same as Tibetans. You'll meet Tibetans abroad. They were the Tibetans left Tibet because they couldn't hold on to power. They were the elites, and when came in, they were afraid of the communists. Same as Hong Kong. You had the the wave. I don't know how many Hong Kong people left. But those ones, they were colliding with Western powers. They were actually rioting. They were criminals. Some of them were even terrorists, really, and they left. So we need to be really careful. People that meet those people from Russia or Iran and so on abroad, they're not necessarily representative of the population that stayed in the country.
Very important point. Thank you. We're over 2 hours. Let's do one last one. Let's do this one. Does China believe in God? Again, China is a nation of over 1.4 billion people. So does China believe in God? Is not really. It's a question that doesn't really make sense. But if you're wondering where does the government stand on God, the government allows people to practice their religion, except if your religion is not a religion, it is a political front using religion as camouflage. So the Salafists being radicalized by Saudi Arabia in Xinjiang, that was put to an end. Uyghur Muslims who have been practicing their faith for generations, that is still allowed. Everything about that is still allowed. There are actually Salafists elsewhere in China that the government more or less turns a blind eye to, because even though they're hardliners, they have not caused any real political trouble, not that I know of. So they leave them alone. When I say political trouble, I mean terrorism, killing people, disrupting society, infringing on other people's rights. There are Christians who are able to practice in China, but if you're one of these Christians who feel the need to impose yourself on everyone, you don't respect their choice to practice the faith that they believe in, even if they don't believe in anything. If you feel the need to impose yourself on them, that's not allowed, because you're bothering someone else. If you want to just practice your faith, then that is fine. And you could say the same for every religion, Buddhism, Islam, Christianity. These are the big ones. I'm sure that there's many smaller ones that are also quite okay, as long as you're not infringing on someone else's rights. And that's pretty much the way it is in most places. Here in Thailand, everyone's allowed to practice whatever faith they want, unless you're starting to bother people or hurt people or endanger people. Angelo, you live in China. What?
Yeah, well, China is a halfway between philosophy and religion. It's a mix of Taoism and Buddhism, but it's not the same concept as we have in the West. It's more like a philosophy of life, really. Just respect the elements, but it's nothing radical, and it's completely separate. It's a secular state. It's completely separate religion from the state. And actually most countries, you go around Europe, the religion doesn't have a say. It's not like in the Middle Age where it's politics and religion was intricated together. No, it's it's private business, the same as sexuality, religion. That's your private business, and they respect it, and but it shouldn't be involved into politics. That's the main point.
Yes, and this is a very good comment, and this is absolutely true. And even in Xinjiang, the government invests in institutions to help preserve Uyghur Islam, to help protect it from being overwritten by U.S. underwritten, Saudi-sponsored Salafism that is just there to radicalize. It is a political Trojan horse using religion as camouflage. So okay, we're over
2 hours. That was a good one. That was a good one. I enjoyed it. I think we got like lots of questions we could answer, but I want to say thank you actually to all the viewers supporting. It's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure, yes. Brian.
Yes, thank you, Angelo, for your time. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. Check the video description below for ways you can find and follow my work as well as Angelo's work. He is still on Twitter, and he's also on YouTube, so check out his work there. If I don't monetize YouTube at all, I don't have super chats or anything. If you want to support the new Atlas, please check out the video description. There are some options there. I want to ask people right now in the comments, please comment. I have seen AJ. I was just on AJ's channel, and he did something at the end where he left the comments open for like 5 or 10 minutes afterwards. And I will figure out how to do that if people really want to keep their conversation going, rather than me just shutting it down the second we leave. So let me know in the comments section. Do you want it to go for another 5 or 10 minutes? Not this time, but next time when I figure out how to do it. Let me know, and we'll try to do this once a week. We'll try to keep it down. I mean, like two hours should be the maximum, because
that's an exception. We try to keep it around 1 hour.
Okay, about an hour and a half at most. Yeah. So, okay, I have some people voting to keep the comment section open. I will invest in figuring out how to do that. Until next week, thank you all for watching.
Thank you.